So this is a course that I taught with a field component in Israel and the West Bank called Quest for Peace, Justice, and Human Rights. The course ran during the winter term, and you might ask, why do something like this? First answer I would say is, I'm a masochist. Because, let's face it, these courses are a bloody lot of work. The logistics, the arrangements, the organizing the students, the preparing them, the fundraising, and then all the stuff around risk management and so forth. It is extra work, but I'm also selfish, or at least self-interested. And I teach these field courses because for me, they're the most rewarding way of teaching. The students are so interested, they really get motivated, they work incredibly hard, and it's rewarding for me as instructor. I'm also doing field courses because in the human rights program, I think it's really essential that students have an opportunity to connect what they're seeing, what they're reading, to do that with real people. It's not just something that's happening out there. And the other reason for doing field courses, and particularly in an international setting, is I find it really helps students to reflect on their situation in Canada. By being there, they also think about what's happening here and how some similar dynamics and issues play out in Canada. Format for this course, we started in January. We had 7 weeks on campus with really intensive reading. Basically, students were doing a book a week. And then we go away for 2 weeks, the reading week during February, plus an additional week beyond that. And then we're back on campus in March to finish off the course here. In a course like this, my objectives are threefold. One is around knowledge. Obviously, I want students to know something about the dynamics of the situation there, about the different viewpoints within different societies in the region, and just to become aware of how contested, how conflicted everything can be. So the course title includes the words peace, justice, and human rights. But that has connotations. When you're talking with the Jews, they tend to talk about the conflict. And so they want to talk about peace. When you're talking with the Palestinians, they tend to talk about the occupation. They don't want to talk about peace, they want to talk about justice. And depending who you're talking to, human rights implies some sort of a bias against certain government policies or so forth. So I start off beginning with the students that these are some of the things they need to learn about in terms of knowledge. Second area of teaching objectives for me is around awareness. The students learn through examining their own assumptions, their own bias. And what I emphasize to students when I do international field courses is that you're going there, but hopefully you expect to learn as much about yourself as you do about people in the other place, the other land. And then the third area is skills, building empathy, learning to listen, to really listen without judgment, to learning to invite disagreement, different points of view, and to be able to articulate both orally as well as in writing alternative or competing viewpoints and positions. So we start off and we move around for 2 weeks. And the little spots on the map there show the different places that we touch down as we visit universities, both in Israel and the West Bank, as we meet with human rights workers and other NGOs, go to museums, and then finish off with a couple of days at the Dead Sea to climb Masada and also have just a quiet place to decompress, do some reflection, integration of what's a couple of pretty intense weeks of just hearing really different perspectives, really different life experiences directly from the people there. So I'm going to talk about a few of the places we visit and give a few excerpts from the course journals that students wrote. So the first stop, we're 30 minutes out of the airport, and we're at a place called Aylan Park or Canada Park. This is a park where people go and take picnics or ride their bikes on the trails or so forth. But until 1967, this was the site of 3 Palestinian villages, which after the war in 67, the villages were bulldozed by the Israelis, and it was turned into a parkland. And it's called Aylan Park, or sometimes Canada Park, because it's particularly designating Canadian donors to the Jewish National Fund. And so you have these plaques listing different donors from Canada and where they're from. So, student journal. Aylan Canada Park was a very heavy note to start on. I feel like I have jumped right into Shavit's book. I'm already feeling conflicted about the earth I am standing on. At one point, our guide pointed out all the rocks that are around us and mentioned that this used to be an Arabic cemetery. So we're actually standing on a bunch of tombs. This makes me uneasy, especially since it's not that long ago that the people were kicked off this land. So the descendants of those buried there are likely still alive, yet unable to come and visit the grave sites. One of the NGOs we visited is led by Sami Awad, a really interesting individual who's been very committed to working at nonviolence in the West Bank. From a student, hearing Sami talk about his refusal to conform to violence in such a hostile region is very inspiring. Sami says that this land is, quote, the land of stories. Everyone has a story and they're all true. It's a war of stories. I really like this viewpoint because it's not discriminating or delegitimating one side, but it's just saying that there are many stories and experiences on these lands. In one of our first classes, we talked about Laura Sims, and one of the things she says that has stuck with me is along the lines of, the source for war in the world is the inability to accept that there is more than one story. And of course, you go to Yad Vashem, a very large and powerful museum for the Holocaust. Student reflection. At Yad Vashem, despite having prior knowledge and a previous experience with Holocaust exhibits, I'm always shocked by the severity of the discrimination, the bigotry, the anti-Semitism that Jewish people have suffered from. Evident in the Hall of Names and in the Memorial for Children, there really is no way to put into words the loss of 6 million people. Our group is one of the few groups that had the capacity to, as non-Muslims, go inside the Dome of the Rock, that incredible structure that sits on top of Haram al-Sharif, Temple Mount. We received the privilege of entering the Dome of the Rock in the Al-Aqsa Mosque. It's certainly not something that we have earned, but like most North Americans, we'll voice our discomfort later as a penance for experiences we would never reject outright at the time that they're offered. And of course, you see the walls and the fences. And a student reflected, I can see now how the construction of this wall is comforting to the Israeli peoples after such traumatic terror attacks. But I can also see how belittling the wall is for the Palestinians. This wall is a huge contributing factor to the marginalization of the Palestinian peoples, but it's also essential to the comfort and security of the Israeli peoples. And a second student reflecting on the wall, I thought a lot about walls, figuratively and literally. I thought about what creates segregation, and though we may not have large border walls in Canada, there's still a lot of segregation. I thought about how the figurative wall can be torn down and whose responsibility that is. However, I have never appreciated freedom of movement more than I do now. It has never struck me as such a significant part of our fundamental freedoms until now. At the end of each day, we would typically spend some time in a circle, talking together, reflecting on what we had seen, what we had heard, what we were experiencing, what we were feeling. Again, from a student journal. Our final activity, Dean has us walking around in a circle, and whoever we stop close to, we say what we appreciate about them. This literally makes me cry, as this is the last time we were gathering together while in the trip portion of the field course. I can positively say that these circles have immensely contributed to my learning here. Each night, talking as a group, I realized something new, or was shown a new perspective, and being able to talk about what we saw and experienced has really added to the overall learning component here, and has made me think much more critically than I can recall for any other class or trip. And I might add that the dynamics of that time together has really continued beyond. This was a course that ended in the spring. This group of students has gotten together at least 4 or 5 times since then for potlucks or doing an event or whatever, just because of the kind of relationships that they formed through that. Although they came from very diverse places, they don't agree on all the things, but also they feel like within the group, they understand one another in a way that it's more difficult for them to talk about their experience with somebody who wasn't there or who assumes a simple allegiance to one side or another.